you'd be hard-pushed to think that this was July, bearing in mind the weather today. It looks as if we've stepped, well, directly from summer straight into autumn. Feels more like September here in Glasgow at the moment with the rain, and it's a lot cooler, and it's pretty damn miserable. So I think you could be forgiven for feeling a bit depressed this morning, waking up and having a look at the newspapers and wondering, where is the hope in all of this for Scotland? Well, I debated with myself this morning about the two topics for today, which one I would actually report on first. So I've decided, rather than giving you the good news first, I'm going to give you the sort of bad news first. And that is, well, basically that this next general election, the one that we are basically being inundated with information about from the state-controlled media, is largely an exercise in futility as far as Scottish people are concerned, because as we know, it doesn't matter what the result is here, because we will get whatever the English voters decide in terms of a new government. That's definitely going to be Keir Starmer. I don't think anybody, not even the BBC, expects the Tories to rally any kind of resurgence in this. And it looks as though, and basing this on the many polls that have been put out by the Scottish media recently, that in Scotland at least it looks like it's a battle for second place between Labour and the Tories. However, the Scottish electorate is heartily tired of everything that's been going on. And having read through many of the different posts on social media today regarding particularly the SNP's campaign for this general election, I've been a bit disappointed. You heard me bigging up Stephen Flynn the other day, the Scottish SNP leader at Westminster, for his performance when he was on Good Morning Britain, which is this BBC chat show, where he basically was given free rein to talk about himself and his background, which was fine. But when he was put on the spot in a general election special, when he was asked by the BBC, by Laura Kuenssberg, about the SNP's plans for independence, bearing in mind, as Ms. Kuenssberg kept referring to an an Institute for Fiscal Studies report on the effects of Scottish independence. And the Institute for Fiscal Studies claimed that if Scotland became independent, it would either have to borrow an awful lot more to meet its spending plans, or it would have to raise taxation. Now, Stephen Flynn was given the opportunity to refute this, and he went on at some length about how Scotland, if it were independent, would do things differently than it would if it was part of the United Kingdom. But he didn't actually refute anything that the Institute for Fiscal Studies said, because the Institute for Fiscal Studies was assuming that if Scotland were independent, it would still be using British pounds, and it neglected to mention that if Scotland is independent, then it will have all of its taxation in which to use for investment in its public services. So instead of having only slightly less than 60% of the money from our own taxation and our revenues, not to mention, incidentally, the massive revenues from oil and gas, which are missing at the moment from the accounts, that this was completely omitted. Mr. Flynn never mentioned it at all. But to me, this was a glaring omission and baffled me when it came from a Westminster SNP leader, because what he should have been saying was that we'd have all of our taxation and we'd have our own currency issuing bank, so we wouldn't have to borrow anything at all from the Bank of England. We could in fact issue our own currency, and the value of the Scottish currency wouldn't be based on just the ability to create money out of thin air, which is how the United Kingdom system works, but would be based on the future value of the vast amount of renewable energy, oil, gas, and other products which Scotland exports. And the value of all of that put together over the next 25 years could easily give value to a Scottish currency almost straight away, and we wouldn't need to borrow any money from anybody else except ourselves, because we would have the ability to create currency that we needed. None of this was mentioned in Mr. Flynn's interview with Laura Kuenssberg, and that mystified me, perhaps because Mr. Flynn had been told not to say anything about that. Maybe the SNP wants to keep this under wraps, but it's baffling because it would have shot down everything the Institute for Fiscal Studies had said. But instead of that, Mr. Flynn said that he accepted the veracity and the legitimacy of the Institute for Fiscal Studies and its findings, but never challenged any of its assumptions or its conclusions at all, and that really is mystifying. Anybody with any kind of grasp of economics or banking or sort of national economics would know that any new country with its own currency can issue its own currency and doesn't rely on the Bank of England. We wouldn't have to borrow money from elsewhere. And we would have all of our taxation. That goes without saying, because as soon as you return your sovereignty, England has no more call on your taxation to spend it elsewhere. Anyway, that aside, other articles have been published as well, and some of them have been concentrating on the rather weird antics of John Swinney in his campaigning in this general election. Now, some of the stuff I've seen has been attributed, let's say, to websites which are not friendly to the SNP at all. However, I have to say that looking at the photographs of Mr. Swinney when he was campaigning, we can see him, I think, going from the sublime to the ridiculous. Mr. Swinney himself has a reputation for seriousness and is presented as a safe pair of hands and an experienced political leader who we can all trust. And yet here he is, on the hustings, on the stump, going out campaigning wearing yellow plastic sunglasses, and on several occasions wearing pink t-shirts and pink Stetson hats, and posing presumably with members of the LGBTQ plus community. Now, whilst there's nothing really wrong with that, it kind of gives the wrong impression of the man, and it is presenting the SNP's leader, his actual leader, party leader, as something of a flippant character, a man who doesn't take this entire process very seriously, even though he claims to, and even though he's also claiming that it's important that the SNP wins a majority in this current election. Now, as I mentioned at the top of the show, the result of this election is a foregone conclusion which cannot be influenced in any way by how we vote here. If everybody in Scotland didn't vote at all, and it doesn't matter who it was, whether it was unionists or people who want independence, it would make no difference whatsoever to the end result of the UK election, because we have such a tiny percentage of seats. Yes, it would give probably the media the chance to say, well, independence is dead and nobody in Scotland wants independence because they're not voting for the SNP. However, that's not true, because we know that the level of independent support is far more massive than is support for either the SNP or any other party for that matter. So it doesn't actually affect the level of support. The question is, how are we going to use our votes? And to be honest with you, until I get into that ballot box on the 4th of July, I have no idea what I'm going to do, because as far as I can see, it wouldn't matter whether I drew a cartoon of John Swinney in a pink Stetson hat, or whether I drew Richie Sunak, saluting a band playing as the good ship the United Kingdom sank beneath the waves. It wouldn't matter at all what I wrote on that ballot paper. The end result would remain the same. The only thing that would make a difference, or the only thing that would be different, would be who my MP was and what they did for my local constituency. At the moment, like most other people, I don't really know what my MP has been doing for my local constituency anyway, and most of us don't. And most of us don't really care, as long as it happens somewhere else and doesn't affect us. So apathy rules supreme, and there's a very confusing set of messages coming from the SNP. Would the collapse of SNP support make any difference at this stage to anything? Personally, apart from the fact that the SNP might collapse and might have to reform and maybe rethink, no, I don't really think so. At the same time, collapsing the SNP vote, although it would please people in Alba, maybe give them a chance to get their toe in the door, that's not really going to happen here, because Alba cannot split the vote in Scotland, because this is a UK general election, and I believe Alba is standing about 20 candidates, but it's very, very unlikely they'll get enough votes to save their majorities in a lot of cases, and unlikely that any of them will be elected. So should we just vote for the SNP anyway and hope for the best? Well, you could. You could stay at home and do nothing. Probably nothing else would change very much. You might get a new MP. Is that a bad thing? Who knows? I mean, they're all going to be sitting in Westminster doing very little anyway, because they don't have any influence, no matter what party they're from in Scotland. So it's not really going to make any difference to the constitutional question at all. So I'm going to leave this topic. Please vote for whoever your conscience and whoever your loyalty says you should vote for. I'm not going to advise you on that, and I'm not going to try and belittle any further any of the political parties, because at the moment I think they're doing a fine job of doing that by themselves. However, on to the good news, and the good news is that the new Scotland 24 TV channel is launching on the 1st of August. Now, for those of you who are unaware of this, this is a project which I was involved in at the beginning, and this new channel, as I say, launches on the 1st of August. Now, it's a channel which is entirely internet based, so it's not available directly on what we would call linear television, the kind of television that comes through your TV aerial or your Sky Dish, but it is available on any device, on a smartphone, on a tablet, on a laptop, on a computer, but it's also available on all modern widescreen smart televisions. So you'll be able to see it anywhere you like, on any gadget you want, even in your own home, on your own TV set. Most people say to me, well, isn't it subscription? No, it's not subscription. It's free to view by anybody in Scotland. You don't have to pay anything. This TV channel is supported entirely by advertising, and that means you don't pay a thing. What's the content? Well, the content is entirely Scottish manufactured. There is no input whatsoever from south of the border or from outside of Scotland. All of the content is made here by Scottish production companies and by Scottish content creators. It's not just an independence channel. This is a channel which is designed to appeal to everybody in Scotland, and therefore it contains all kinds of content. Yes, there will be pro-independence content, so bloggers like myself will have regular time slots in the programme, and S24 is looking for more content. So anyone who's writing scripts, preparing blogs, who sits in front of a smartphone or a camera to make content, please contact them. I'll give you more details if you want. You can contact them through me. They're also producing documentaries, as well as the news content and political content, which I've already mentioned. There's plans to be comedy shows. There will also be a lot of live and recorded music from all across Scotland. There will be arts programmes. There will be local news stories from all across Scotland, including the Highlands, the islands, everywhere. And we're looking for local people to make content, to actually make videos, to present them, and to have them shown on the channel. This is the first ever, as far as I know, attempt to start a commercial TV channel in Scotland, which is not controlled by the United Kingdom and has nothing at all to do with any United Kingdom owned media companies. This is entirely freelance and entirely independent of everybody. Because it is wide-ranging, the idea of this channel is not just to produce independence content, but to provide a massive shop window for everyone in Scotland to hear news about Scotland which they are not allowed to hear by the BBC, because they don't like good news stories in Scotland. Everything has to be bad, as you know. So this is a huge change. Anyway, I'd encourage everybody to sign up to S24. It has a website, and I will be able to give details later on in my timeline about how you can sign up, how you can subscribe, and you will be able to get it on virtually every social media platform that there is. So it'll be available on Facebook, for example, on YouTube. It will be available through Snapchat, WhatsApp, and all kinds of other applications of social media. So everyone will be able to see it, of all ages, and there will be content for everybody, no matter who they are. It also means that things like documentaries, incidentally, at least one of these new documentaries will be released every week, and that will play throughout the week during every day. It will be scheduled alongside all the other content. So it will be available to watch. You'll be able to rewind it. You'll be able to watch it at your leisure whenever you want. It doesn't matter when the programming is on. You'll be able to go through the schedule and choose what you want. So it's not like pay-per-view. You don't pay anything. As long as you have a smart device of some kind, including your TV set, you can watch anytime you like. And it costs you nothing because it's supported by adverts. Now, okay, those of you who don't like adverts, well, you can't have a TV channel for free without some kind of support. And in the past, people have attempted to do independent Scottish television channels which are subscription only, but people don't like paying for television subscriptions, especially when they're already paying enormous amounts of money to the BBC with their so-called license fee, which is basically an involuntary tax when watching television of any kind. So these are the good things, and this is coming up on August the 1st, and the first of the documentaries is going to look at Scotland's Indigenous Space Programme, a subject which the BBC and many other United Kingdom television companies have attempted to paint as a British enterprise, which it definitely isn't, especially the Saxiford launch site in Shetland, which is entirely a local effort, which has entirely been locally funded. The launcher companies, the rocket companies which will launch from this site, are coming from all over Europe, and the first one is probably going to be a German company who will launch there first. But as I've mentioned many times before, there are two indigenous Scottish rocket launcher companies, Skyrora and Orbex, both headquartered here and both staffed here, producing jobs and opportunities for Scottish engineers and scientists at the same time. There are also links with various countries in Europe as well. So this is a Scottish and European effort. And for this first documentary, this is going to open people's eyes to what exactly the Scottish space industry does and how it has done so despite not being funded by the United Kingdom. And also despite the fact that the United Kingdom will claim ownership over any success that it has. So this is, I think, the first of many new documentaries. There will be another documentary later in August, which is specifically about the independence movement. I think I will be featuring on that because I was interviewed alongside many other independence activists for this programme, and I'll announce more details of when that will be available too. So for the first time in living memory, the people of Scotland will be able to see news about their own country made by people who live in their own country and not spun by a news agency or a news propaganda outlet from a foreign country. Basically, that's about it for today's Inde-Car, but as well as giving the rather depressing news about this general election over which we have no control, I thought we should temper that with the good news that we are about to get a television channel which will show us stuff that we want to see and not bad news stories making us feel bad, unhappy and depressed about where we live, because Scotland is not a bad, depressing and unhappy place to live. It's just that the focus has been on those things because the television companies are based in London, and that's what they want to convince you of, that you live in a crap place. And therefore you should just shut up and let England rule Scotland because that's what's good for you. Anyway, whichever way you vote on the 4th, it's probably a good idea to vote for somebody, because unless we exercise our right to democracy, democracy fails. And at the moment, democracy across the planet, in the Western Hemisphere at least, is struggling, particularly with post-truth politicians such as Donald Trump and Nigel Farage. Many people have pointed out to me that Nigel Farage's latest effort to attract thousands of people to one of his reform gatherings attracted over 5,000 people. This is a worrying sign of a massive lurch to the right south of the border, not something we wish to import into Scotland by any means at all. It is worrying, but if we don't want to have that kind of influence in our own politics, then the only way we can really stop it from happening is to separate ourselves from the country next door, go it alone, have our own currency, issue our own currency so that we don't have to borrow from the Bank of England, and retain all of our taxes and revenues from our vast natural resources. All of that is there for our taking. All we would have to do is have the political will from the various parties of independence and the movement in general, and everybody connected with independence in the election in 2026, because that is the next opportunity when we can really exert our influence at the ballot box and actually get our independence. Now, it depends on a lot of things, obviously, and there has to be some hard work done in the background to make contact with other countries outside of the UK to get their support for what we want to do to gain independence through the ballot box in 2026, which would be the next available opportunity. Anyway, that is it from Inde-Car today, this 1st of July. I hope the weather improves, and I hope if you are on holiday and you're watching this from there, that you're having a great time and avoiding the showers, which are dogging my every move today. Anyway, from Inde-Car, that's it today. Please, if you can afford to, keep donating to Inde-Car. These little sums of money help me carry on. I don't need a huge amount. I'm not trying to raise thousands for this. Really, just a few tens of pounds a week does the trick for Inde-Car. So thank you for watching to the end. Keep the faith, and remember that hope hasn't disappeared just because this general election really is nothing that we can control. We will now finally be able to control what we see on our television screens after August the 1st. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye for now.